So now I am so proud to introduce my colleague, Karen Schreck, who is also a published author and our Community Engagement Associate at the library, to introduce our program tonight. Hand it over to you, Karen.
Thank you, Courtney. Mary, we're so glad you're with us. Thank you for being here tonight and excited for our conversation. I wanted to start just by sharing a little bit about Mary, her bio. Mary Kubica is the New York Times and USA Today bestselling author of 6 novels, including The Good Girl, Pretty Baby, Don't You Cry, Every Last Lie, When the Lights Go Out, and The Other Misses. A former high school history teacher, Mary lives outside of Chicago with her husband and 2 children. Mary's novels have been translated into over 30 languages and have sold over 2 million copies worldwide. She's been described as a, quote, hell of a storyteller by Kirkus Reviews and a writer of vice-like control by the Chicago Tribune. And her novels have been praised as hypnotic by people and thrilling and illuminating by the Los Angeles Times. So good to have you, Mary. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Pleasure and a delight. The delight is ours. So I thought we could begin by talking about your most recent novel, The Other Misses, which hit shelves last February and was released in paperback in August. Becky Anderson of Anderson's Bookshop has dubbed you the Tsarina of the twists. I love that. And if anyone wonders about Becky's comment, they only have to dig into The Other Misses to understand its implications. A number of bloggers and reviewers have stated that this novel has one of the most surprising endings they've ever read. Without giving too much away, would you please share your synopsis of The Other Misses?
Yeah, absolutely. So The Other Misses is about a Chicago family, the Faust family. It's Will, Sadie, and their 2 sons, Otto and Tate. And when Will's sister dies, they inherit her home, off the coast of Maine. It's on a little island off the coast of Maine. And the Fausts have had just kind of a really hard time in Chicago. They've had a number of personal and professional hardships. And so it's a really good time for them to kind of leave Chicago behind, move to Maine, and start over fresh. Not only are they getting ownership of this house, but they're also getting guardianship of Will's 16-year-old niece, Imogen, whose mother has just died. Her father's never been in the picture. So she's grieving, she's angry, and she's really kind of resentful of the fact that this family is moving into her home with her, and that their fresh start kind of comes at her expense. So things get off to a rocky start to begin with, and then get even worse when a woman right across the street from them winds up murdered. And all eyes in this kind of unwelcoming community look suspiciously towards the Faust family. And the mother, Sadie, realizes that the only way to clear their name is for her to figure out who killed this woman for herself.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an incredible read. I'm curious how you landed on this subject matter, and I'm wondering if the inspiration for the characters in this novel and the plot for this book came to you as it typically does in your other novels?
Yeah. So with this one, it's hard to talk about the inspiration because the first thing that came to me was actually the twist. So I won't get into any detail there because I don't want to ruin it for those who haven't read it yet. But it was the twist that I dreamed up first, and I thought I have to do that, and it was very psychological and just one of those things that I love to explore when I write my novels, just to really get deep inside my characters' heads. And so I was intrigued by the idea. So really the Faust family and their move to Maine and all of that came secondary to this twist. And that's totally different than the way I usually write. Usually I have my starting points and no idea where I'm going to go with it. And so I just, I get up in the morning and I start writing, and I really have no idea what might happen in the lives of my characters on that given day. But I just, start creating the characters and their lives and watching this mystery kind of unfold organically, and hope and pray that at some point during the writing process, I figure out how it's all going to come together in the end. But with The Other Misses, I had that ending point, and I had to kind of follow a path to that. And so it was a different writing experience for me. The other thing that made it different was because I knew the ending. I had written that twist right there in a proposal that I turned into my editor at the very beginning. Um, and she loved it and she was intrigued by it, but it made it hard to edit and revise kind of unbiasedly, because we both knew exactly where this book was going. And so we had a lot of discussion about, is this too much of a giveaway? Will readers catch on to this? And it was something that I don't think we'd ever experienced before, just because usually she doesn't know what my twist is going to be. So she can be that kind of unbiased perspective. So for the first time, usually the only people that I ever share a draft with are my editor and my agent and my husband. But with this book, once my editor and I were done with all the revisions, she shared it with a number of people at my publisher's office. And I shared it actually with a number of ladies in my own book club, just so that we could know, exactly what readers' take might be and if it was too revealing.
That's super interesting. I'm curious if it sounds like there were some challenges with this way. Do you think you would like to write that way again? Do you prefer one method over the other?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think there was some comfort in it, and knowing from the beginning that I had that twist, because in the genre that I write, the twist is sort of everything. And now that I've written a number of novels, coming up with something totally unique that I haven't done before, it becomes more difficult with each book. It's also a genre that I feel like has exploded over the last 5 or 6 years. So there are so many incredible authors entering this field, and so then I'm constantly thinking, well, has somebody else done this before? What kind of twist can I dream up that some other author hasn't already done? So there is kind of a lot of angst in that twist. So that was a comfort. I'll be honest, it was a comfort knowing that I had that figured out. But I always say that my favorite part of the writing process is, like partway through the manuscript, when the pieces do come together and I can finally start to visualize that ending, and there's that aha moment. This is going to work out, this story will come together, and I do have a twist. And so because I knew the ending, that wasn't necessarily there, that big happy moment in the middle of the writing process. I didn't necessarily experience it, but it was still really exciting when, all the pieces came together. It was just that they came together in a little bit different way than when I'm used to.
Yeah, that's incredibly interesting, the difference. I think a lot of mystery writers, if I understand, or have the ending and then write toward that. The
Yeah.
fact that you do it intuitively in your other books is incredible to me.
Yeah, I will say amongst authors, we always talk about it if we're plotters or pantsers, if we plot our books out in advance or prefer to write by the seat of our pants. And that's definitely me. I usually don't know where I'm going, and there's kind of a rush with it. I think the adrenaline kicks in, and some moments it's more panic than anything, but it's just really fun to see where this story is going to go and not know.
Yeah, interesting. So speaking of the genre that you write in, I've read that people sometimes define it as psychological thriller. Is that how you see
Yeah.
it?
Yes, I've heard psychological thriller, psychological suspense, but yeah, basically, something along those lines.
Yeah, and I've also heard people say, in terms of psychological thriller, that you really helped solidify the genre. The Good Girl came out, and like you said, it's holding increasing widespread appeal, I think.
Mhm.
And in my opinion, I find it a really interesting genre because it seems like it's opening the door for a lot of women writers as well.
Yeah.
So I guess this is maybe an obvious question, but for you in particular, I'm curious how you define, like what separates a psychological thriller from a straight up thriller, or
Yeah.
a traditional thriller. Maybe that's a better word.
Right. In my mind, there's a lot less gore. I feel like the mystery is really, it's not, there is violence. I'd be lying if I said that there wasn't some violence on the page, but I feel like it's not so much about that as, just getting deep into these characters' heads and finding out, what motivates them and just kind of what in their past has brought them to this moment in their lives. And I think that I like to say usually that I take characters they're pretty ordinary people, they're not so different from you and me, but I put them in really extraordinary situations and then sort of see what they do with themselves and how they tackle these really difficult situations. And I think that's what draws me to it. Knock on wood, I haven't been put in any really extraordinary situation like my characters have been. But I think that we don't know what we would do, if we found ourselves living across, the street from where a woman was brutally murdered, or just if we were in any of these situations that I put my characters in. So that is what makes it psychological to me, is just really, letting that mystery develop inside the characters' heads and see, how they kind of try and solve these mysteries that way versus kind of the blood and gore that you might see in just the very physical mystery that you might see happening in other thrillers.
Oh, interesting. I love this statement you made in an interview that has to do with, thrillers and plotting and things like that. And you said that for you, you like to anticipate where readers might expect things to go and then go the other way. And I felt like, wow, that is brilliant. Like the bell rang and I just kind of thought about it. And then I thought, like for those of us who write, or for those of us who like to read mysteries and thrillers and make predictions about the plot, I found myself wondering, like, how on earth do you do that? Like, anticipate where readers might go. I'm wondering, like, is it a sixth sense, or is there logic to it, or
Yeah, I think because I love to read in this genre, and or when I watch TV, it's always some kind of mystery, suspense show. So I think that I definitely gravitate towards that. So whenever I start to write, whenever I start to read a book, I'm not 2 pages in before I'm, like making that mental list of what I think has happened. I'm always trying to solve it. So I think that when I start writing, I sort of put myself in that reader's shoes. And once I've sort of laid the scene and created my characters and the mystery is unfolding on the page, then I start to think, assuming that I don't have my ending in mind, then I start to think, what is the reader going to think is happening, and I sort of let that guide me as to what direction I'm not going to take, and I try to look at it in a different way, and it's sort of hard to put into words, but sometimes it's not so much about a who done it but a why done it, I guess I should say. Like, I try to take that mystery and come at it from a different angle in a way that the reader isn't necessarily going to anticipate. So that's sort of the goal for me. It's easier said than done sometimes. But like I said earlier, that moment where it does come together and, I come up with something that I'm never going to fool everybody. And I realize that. But, when I think I can fool many people, that makes me really happy. I think that the trick too is that readers don't want to feel cheated. They want to be able to get to the end of the book and be surprised and be able to look back at the novel and say, oh yeah, now I see it. Or if they were to read the book again, they would see those clues there. So that's one of the things that is really important, I think, as a suspense author, is to just very delicately, not too revealingly, but you have to lay that groundwork for the reader, because otherwise it feels like this twist, came out of nowhere and it's impractical. So
yeah,
there's a delicate balance there.
yeah. With this book, I definitely had that gratification of having the big reveal and then going back
Good.
and sussing out these little hints and, clues along the way.
I'm so glad. Thank you for
Yeah,
saying.
they're really pleasurable. So the other misses highlights your talent for developing unreliable narrators, and it also highlights the facility with which you use multiple points of view to tell a unified story. And I'm wondering what draws you to multiple points of view and also to this unreliable narrator that you play with a lot.
Yeah. So all of my books so far have had multiple points of view. And it was, I don't think I set out ever intentionally to do it, but with my first book, The Good Girl, when I started writing the book, I think I knew right away that this was a novel that I just wanted to see through many different eyes. I thought it would be important to get, in The Good Girl, we have a detective's point of view, the mother of a missing woman, and we actually have our villain, his point of view as well. So that was kind of neat, and I felt like I was able to tell this story from all these different points of view, and some of them contradict one another. So I think it keeps the reader a little bit on their toes. They have to decide who they're going to trust. And it's not necessarily that, these narrators are lying, but it's just that they have a different perspective. And I loved that. With some of my novels, I also play around with time too. The novel is not coming at you linearly, but it's sort of jumping around in time, which I like too, because you have like this mystery at the center of it, and you're coming to it from earlier on and from later, and I think it just adds to the tension of the story a little bit. So that was one of the things that I started by accident, because I thought it would be a good way to tell The Good Girl. And I just found that I loved writing that way. And it made the writing experience and hopefully the reading experience that much richer. I've kept that throughout. I will say I'm not too far in, but I'm working on my next novel. And so far it has just one perspective. So I'm curious if I will see that through the whole book, or at some point I may decide that we need to hear from somebody else. Um, but as for you asked, there was a second part of that, and now I'm blanking.
Well, I think I said like why the unreliable narrator. Yeah.
Yeah, the unreliable narrator. I do really like my unreliable narrators, and that too. I don't think it's intentional, and they're not unreliable because they're lying to the reader. They're unreliable for some other reason. In one book, someone had amnesia, in another, someone was suffering from horrible insomnia that made her unreliable, and we have an unreliable narrator in the other misses for various reasons too. And I think that it keeps the reader on their toes, because as soon as the reader senses that unreliability, they have to decide, am I going to trust this narrator? And it's a tricky thing for the reader, because here is, the narrator, this person that is guiding them through the novel, and we don't know how trustworthy they are. Can we take the things that they're saying at face value, or do we have to question everything that the narrator says? So as a writer, I'm just really drawn to that style. As a reader, I am too.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I love about your unreliable narrators is that, what you said about the villain or the liar, that's how my stereotype about unreliable narrators. But in your books, you know, I typically feel a lot of empathy for them. I feel with them. They're really dimensional. And even when their truth is resolved or revealed, I still feel kind of a compassion for them and connected with them, even though I feel a little bit, I remember with The Good Girl, like a little bit like, yeah, along the way. I don't want to say tricked, but.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate you saying that, because my characters, they're sort of everything to me in the writing process. And as a writer, like the moment that the writing clicks and I feel really comfortable in a novel is the moment that I start to truly understand my characters. Any book that I start, no matter how many books I've written, I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. How do I write a book? And then that moment I really get to know my characters, that's the moment that the writing becomes so much easier, and it's very fluid. I know what the characters would do or say in a situation. So I try really, really hard to make them authentic. They make terrible choices because it's a suspense novel and they kind of have to, but I work really hard to give them like a very valid reason why, if it's just something about their personality, or if, some really difficult situation has made them, like they have to choose this awful thing to do because they have to, I try to to really ground it and give them, give the reader reason that this is happening. I think as a reader, I've read a number of books where I just don't connect with the character, and I feel less inclined to have, to either want to see the book all the way through or just to really care too much what happens to the character at the end of the book. And so I'm very aware of that when I'm writing, and I try to, they don't have to be likable, but you have to be able as a reader to understand them.
Yeah. I think what you've said, what I've read, is that you tend to write each of the voices from beginning to end in these multiple points of view. And then, so you get through the first one and then you pick up another one and then see that through. And I'm wondering if the first perspective you tackle typically guides you through the nuances of the plot, or does, as you add these voices, does it change and shift the events unfolding?
Right. It's a little bit of both, but usually that first narrator solves a lot of plot issues for me. And then it's really fun as I write the other narrators to figure out, oh, this is how, this is gonna merge with something I said in one of the previous narrators' points of view. So yeah, I do, with the other misses, for the most part, we have three narrators. There's Sadie, a woman named Camille, and then a little girl named Mouse. And so I wrote all of Sadie first, and then all of Camille and all of Mouse at the end. And it sounds, I know that when I say it, it sounds like it would be difficult, or that I'm somehow making things harder on myself. But when I'm writing it, when I can just write Sadie's perspective, I feel like it really is simplifying the process for me, because I'm only focusing on one timeline. I'm only focusing, on her plot, not as it overlaps with other characters, but just what's going on in her life. And then keeping her voice really authentic. I write almost entirely from the first person perspective, because I can just really sort of become one with that character. I can put myself in their shoes, and it helps me to really understand them better, and then hopefully get them across better on the page. I think it would be really difficult. Sadie and Camille, for example, have such unique voices, and then Mouse is a little girl, so that's totally different voice. And so I think that if I was jumping from chapter to chapter between all of this, at some point they would just all sound like Mary Kubica, and they would no longer sound like their individual characters.
Sure. You say you write in first person, but this book is a bit of a departure, because typically you write in first person, because, well, for two reasons. One, you write in third person, like in the she instead of the I. And then also it's the first book I think that you've set entirely out of Chicago. I mean, they came from Chicago, but they're in this more remote location. And I'm wondering, was there something that motivated you to try it, or did it just come to you like that?
I used to always say every book I write is going to be set in Chicago. And then there came a point that I started to worry, am I being redundant? I felt like it wasn't necessarily bringing anything new to the setting. And setting is important to me, like character too, because it just adds to that atmosphere of the book. And so I knew, I think it was when I was just writing my proposal, I knew really before I started writing this book that I wanted to take it outside of Chicago. But I had to have that connection, which is why that the Fausts come from Chicago. I wanted to still, have that connection to the city. But I also felt, I felt like the isolation of this island off the coast of Maine really added to the atmosphere of this book. And it changed everything. This book wouldn't have been what it is, I think, on the streets of Chicago or any other city, because, we're dealing with things in this novel, like access to a hospital or to law enforcement, which are really scarce. There's like one police officer on this little island. And in order for anybody to get to the hospital, they have to take a police boat across the bay, and it takes time. And so I think that just really added to the isolation and sort of the urgency that's happening in the book. It's also set late fall, early winter. So the weather is really turning on them. And Sadie, the mother, has this overwhelming fear that, the bay around the island is going to freeze and the ferries won't be able to get through, and she will literally be trapped on this island. So I think that all added to that tension of the book in a way that if it was set, in a city or the suburbs, wouldn't have happened.
Right. And it really had that feel of what happens to a place that might be far more populated in the summer
Right.
when the people leave, the tourists leave. And I think that too up the ante of the feeling of isolation.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, the tension really.
Yeah.
So,
Here
yeah,
they are, on this tiny island, and the people that are there with them, they're the year-round residents, and they don't really take very well to newcomers,
right,
and so they don't have an opportunity to meet their neighbors and get friendly with their neighbors, and so that doesn't help things.
right, absolutely. I do love your Chicago settings though. Like I think you really capture a city that you clearly love and yourself. And I'm just wondering why you chose to stick with it for so many books. Is it like it just as your sweet was your, it sounds like you might be evolving, but it's like what a real sweet spot for you, I think.
It is, I think just it's home, and my books kind of, they fluctuate between the city and suburbs.
Mhm.
And I just feel like it's home. I feel like I can describe it, I know it. I don't necessarily have to I have to research some things, but I don't have to research everything. And it's important to me. I know that I've met so many readers who are from Chicago, and just say how meaningful it is to them to read these books all set, in this place that they have grown up. And so I do love it. And I will say my next book is done and it's back in the suburbs of Chicago. So I have come back home.
Oh, wow. That's great. That's great. You also use other remote locations though. Really, I love the contrast between this, really urban center and then these more rural
Yeah.
locations as well.
Yeah. Yes.
Um, I just want to go kind of way back and just ask you what initially inspired you to be a writer.
Yeah.
And I don't know if um, there was a moment where you decided to really go for it and claim it, and what your kind of path to publication was like as well.
For fun. I am person who loved to write, and she shared some of her writing with me when we were younger, and it was just one of those things that I fell in love with right away. I love doing it. I love to create these characters and sort of live vicariously through them. But I was always very shy about my writing. It was something that it was really personal to me, and so when I was younger, it never crossed my mind that I might want to be an author when I grew up. Just writing for fun and writing to publish books were two completely different things. But so I was a high school history teacher for a number of years. But I wrote all the time. I wrote when I myself was in school, when I was in college, I wrote when I was teaching, just whatever free time I had, I was always writing. And then my daughter was born in 2005, and I decided to leave my teaching career for a while to raise my family. And it was very shortly after she was born. I mean, in my head, it was like days later, but I started working on The Good Girl. And when I started writing it, it was like anything that I had written, in the many years before that. But pretty quickly into it, I fell in love with this book just in a way that I hadn't anything I had written previously. I kind of felt in my gut that there was something special about this book. And I had never actually finished a book before that time either, I should say. So with The Good Girl, I thought, I owe it to myself. I owe it to these characters to see this through, even if nothing ever becomes of this book. I just want to finish it. And so it took 5 years to finish The Good Girl. I have a son who's just 2 years younger than my daughter. So I had two little ones at home, and just finding any time to write was difficult. But when they would nap, or when they had gone to bed in the evening, or even if they were just kind of content, but awake, I would write a little bit here and there on the novel. And when I finished it 5 years later, I finished it, and I just felt that urge to see what I could do, see if I could do anything with this book. And I hadn't studied creative writing. I had never been part of a writer's group. So I really knew nothing about how publishing worked. So I did some research online, and I got my hands on a book called The Writer's Market. And it lists literary agents, which is the first step in getting published, is to find a literary agent. It lists all these literary agents, and I went through with my highlighter and highlighted everybody, that represented suspense. And I typed up a query letter And I started sending my query letter out, and depending on the agent, some of them might want some sample pages with the query letter, some just wanted the query letter. But I sent so many query letters out. I was not very discerning about who I was sending to. It was just, any agent that represented suspense. I didn't keep good track, but I know that there were like 50 to 75 agents that I queried with the good girl. And there were a couple agents that asked to read more of the manuscript. There were three, I remember, that wanted to read the whole thing. But ultimately, every single one of them turned it down. And, so I thought, this book's never going to be published. And I kept writing just because I loved to write so much. I'd like to say that even if I never published anything, I would still be writing today just because it's something I love to do so much. But it was, whatever I wrote back then, it was nothing that I could remember because it didn't move me the way that the good girl had. I knew at that point in my life that was just the best that I could do. So 2 years passed actually from that final rejection. I hadn't forgotten about it, but I don't think I opened the manuscript in those 2 years. When out of the blue, one of these agents sends me an email and she wants to know, did I sell my book? Was I being represented? And as it so happens, when she first read The Good Girl, she was right out of college, brand new to this literary agency, and she had been given the job of going through the slush pile, and came across The Good Girl, took it home. She read it in one sitting, fell in love with it. But the next day, she just couldn't get the rest of her team on board, and she was working as an assistant for somebody else, so she wasn't an agent yet. She didn't have the authority to take this on herself. So she had to pass on her team's behalf. Well, within the next 2 years, she was promoted to an actual agent when she could take on her own clients. And she remembered The Good Girl and reached back out to me. So it was really a dream come true situation. And in retrospect, it was really the best way that it could have happened because I knew she was as passionate about that book. To remember it for 2 years, and then to seek me out, that book meant so much to her. So that was very special. And she's still my agent now. And whenever I talk to groups, because I feel like there are many aspiring writers, when I talk to libraries or at bookstores. And so I always say, it's such a subjective industry and timing is everything, but you just really need that one person that's going to champion your book for you. And so sometimes it's a matter of just kind of keeping at it, until you can find that one person who's as passionate about your work as you are.
Wow, incredible story. And I have questions, a lot of questions related to that, but I think the one that comes to mind, thinking of people in the audience who might be aspiring writers or pursuing their first novel, I'm just curious, like, it took you 5 years to write it.
Mhm.
How was it ever challenging to kind of come back to it, keep going? And then after you received those rejections and put it aside for 2 years, did you have to overcome some feelings around that? Some
Yeah.
disappointments or?
I did, during the 5 years that I was writing it, and it wasn't a straight 5 years. There would be times where just life got busy and I didn't write for a month at a time. And it would be, and then I'd start missing it and I'd want to get back to it. And so I'd make that time to work on it a little bit here and there. But getting back into the manuscript after being away from it for a chunk of time is always hard. You don't remember where you left off. And but I also think that there's something really valuable about coming at the manuscript with fresh eyes. Sometimes you're just like too kind of like drowning in it, and it's hard to see what's working and what's not working. But when you're able to take a step back and have that month-long break or whatever, it has you have a totally different opinion of the manuscript when you come back to it. So it was always tricky getting back into it, but it was a really good thing for me too, because I think that every time I came back to work on it, maybe I made it a little bit better. But I remember with getting the rejections, it was not fun. And I had not told anybody that I was working on The Good Girl or that I was working on a book, period, other than my husband. Most people in my life just assumes that I had stopped writing, when I was in high school or something. They did not know it was something that I continued to do. And I intentionally didn't tell anybody I was working on this novel because I knew people would want to know how was it going. And, if it didn't work out, then I felt like people would be disappointed, or they'd feel disappointed for me, I should say. So I didn't tell anybody. My husband knew I was working on it, but I wouldn't let him read it. I wasn't sure if my work was any good. I didn't, was it deserving of being published? I had no idea. But it was so much easier for me to send these query letters off to these agents in New York City that I never had to lay eyes on. I'd rather get the rejection from them than have someone I love, read it and tell me it's no good. Not that anybody would have done that, but when Rachel is her name, when she reached back out to me after all that time, it was shock more than anything. I really had to take a minute and think, what is she talking about? Because so much time had passed, and I just couldn't believe that it was happening.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. So if my math is correct, it seems like you've basically produced about a book a year since 2014.
Yeah, I think 2019 was the only year I didn't have a book.
Yeah. And it's kind of, you're talking about that perseverance that you had, but you also talk about taking a break and coming back to it with fresh eyes. And given it seems like you must be writing under deadline a lot. And I'm curious how you do that, how you manage to maintain your schedule, produce these books, go through not only the drafting and the revising, but the editing, and then also the kind of imagining what's next.
Right.
That's incredible.
Right. It's definitely a much different experience than when I was writing, The Good Girl, and there was no deadline and no expectations and no time constraints, just none of that. So I'm always telling people, I want to slow down. I want to get on a slower pace somehow. But the thing is, I love writing so much that anytime I'm away from it, I miss it, or if I'm not like firmly settled in a manuscript. I had a little bit of trouble getting started on my next book. I have the next book, number 7 is done. And I'm actually working on number 8 right now. And I had a little bit of trouble kind of getting just situated in it. And I blame COVID and a million other things, that are happening right now. But I felt a little lost not being just in a manuscript and writing, but kind of struggling to find my footing there. So I just feel, really comfortable, I think, when I'm writing. But but the deadlines make me nervous, I will say, even though I have met every one of my deadlines, and usually with time to spare, just knowing that, this thing has a due date does make me nervous, because writing, sometimes the words flow and sometimes I can't write a good sentence to save my life. So it just sort of depends on the day. I don't really make myself keep to a word count, just because I understand that some days will be more productive than other days, but it's all going to even out in the end. So that's just kind of how I do it. But you're right in that, with the publishing a book a year, and part of that time is spent, doing publicity for a book that is coming out. It probably leaves me with maybe 9 to 10 months to write and edit a book. I don't get a lot of the break from the manuscript when I'm doing the drafting stage, but I do see it when I'm doing revisions with my editor. Because, for example, when I give it to her, and I wait for feedback, it could take a few weeks for her to read it and get her notes back to me. So that's sort of the chance, that's where I'm sort of given that break to come back at it with fresh eyes when she returns the manuscripts.
Great. I forgot about the publicity part, right? Yeah, I'd added those other things, but that part as well, takes a lot of time.
It's fun though. I have to say, I write in solitude, of course, it's just me and my characters. So then to be able to go out and share with readers, and the readers are just so phenomenal and enthusiastic. That's kind of what makes it all worth it. So I really enjoy that part.
And do you have any rituals or structures that you stick to that, kind of, make it work at certain times, like regular?
Yeah, I think the biggest ritual for me is that I'm up early every day. I usually start my writing at 5 o'clock every day. I started that when my kids were really young and I was just getting started in my career. And that was the only time that I had to myself, was maybe 5 to 7 a.m. So I got in that habit. Now they're 13 and 15. So, they don't need me as much. But I just love it. I don't know why, but the thoughts are just so much more clear at 5 in the morning than they are at noon or 3 in the afternoon. So I love getting up, getting my coffee. The house is quiet, everyone's asleep, and just writing. I would say still between 5 and 7 or 5 and 8 in the morning is when I get the majority of my work done.
Yeah, it's like you're still in a dream state and you haven't been using language all day, which,
Right.
kind of clutters up the mind as well, I think.
Yeah.
So this is going to be the last question from me. And I am thrilled for you because, I learned that after a competitive bidding process, Netflix acquired the rights to The Other Misses,
Yeah.
and it's going to be made into a feature film, which is so incredibly exciting. I can't even imagine what that would feel like. And I would love to hear what it felt like for you. But yeah, I think the other thing that I think is fascinating is that you're also going to be an executive producer on the film, which is something that's kind of unique, I think, as well.
Yeah.
So could you just tell us a little bit about that experience? And
I would love to. I mean, this whole thing was just beyond my wildest dreams. I have a film agent also in addition to the literary agent. And so once my editor and I had finished working on The Other Misses, we were done with it probably almost a year before the book came out. But at that point, my film agent was able to take it around and start shopping it to different production companies. And I was so excited when two offers came in, one being from Netflix, and I don't know, I just couldn't believe it was happening. And I feel like Netflix these days is just sort of everything. I feel like the streaming services, people love to sit at home in their pajamas or in the comfort of their own living rooms and watch these shows or these movies on Netflix. And so I knew that this was where I needed to be, where the Other Misses needed to be. And so far it's just been a really good experience. I do not know what the executive producer roles will entail, but I will say that I've been able to have a number of phone calls with the producer and the executive producer working on this in Netflix. And they keep me in the loop as much as they can. So far, they do have a screenplay. A wonderful screenwriter named Jack Thorne wrote the screenplay for this. He did Wonder. He did the Harry Potter a play that was on Broadway. So he's done a number of phenomenal things. And so I'm so excited that he was the one to write this. I have not read it yet. And then I know that right now they're in the process of hiring a director. And then after that, they'll start to attach talent, actors and actresses to it. There was, of course, things were slowed down because of COVID, but I do believe that a lot of these companies are able to start filming again. So hopefully we'll be making some more progress in the near future. They did just renew the option, which gives them, now they have it for another 18 months. So I was really excited about that. And just, I can't wait to, see what happens over the next few months.
yeah, I'm so glad you can. I mean, I was curious what the executive producer title meant, but it does sound like then you can be involved in the process and make sure, you feel comfortable with it. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations on that, Mary. It's going to be so fun to see when it comes out.
Oh, I can't wait to see it.
I hope the deadline, I hope we get a date soon so we get a sense of it. So thank you.
Yes.
So, Courtney, that's me. I don't know. I mean, I have more, but I
Thank
would
you.
like to also open it up.
That was fascinating. I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much to you both. And Mary, congratulations on your Netflix deal. I am so excited to watch that and after I read the book. So anyone in the audience, if you have any questions for Mary, you can pop those into the Q&A function at the bottom or the chat. I'll be watching both. We do have our first question. One of our audience members is requesting just a little snippet maybe about the story of your next book, Local Woman Missing.
Yeah. So Local Woman Missing, I don't have a great elevator pitch, so you have to bear with me a little bit here. But it'll be out in May 4th of 2021, and it's set in the suburbs of Chicago, where over the course of a couple weeks, 2 women and a girl go missing. And so there's an investigation into their disappearances. Are they related? Are these isolated incidents? But eventually, it goes cold until about 11 years later, when one of them shockingly returns. And now everybody wants to know, where has she been all this time, and where are the other 2? So that will be out in May, and I have seen a cover for it, which I love, and I'm like 99% sure it's final, and I'm going to be able to share it in the next few days. So I'm really excited about that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If there's any questions, you can put those in the Q&A. I was wondering if you could expand a little on how the pandemic has impacted your writing in any way, or just, it's impacted all of us, but the writing process.
Yeah, I think it has in a couple of ways. My kids are doing remote learning, like many in our communities are. My husband is still home, working from home, so just I'm used to writing in solitude, and I said earlier, my kids are a little bit older. They're more independent. They don't really need a lot from me during the day. They go to their room and do their Zooms, but it's just. I think that usually when I write, I just literally lose myself in my characters and my story. And it's harder to do when there are people in the house, and, everybody's like on a different lunch schedule, and the internet goes out, and, mom. So I just feel like there are those interruptions that are taking me away from the writing a little bit. So that's been harder. I'm not complaining about it. I definitely try and stick to that early morning schedule, get my writing in as best I can before everybody is up. And then if I can get some more words in later in the day, great. But if I can't, then I can't. But I think the other thing that's been hard, which I think it's hard on all of us, is it's so emotional, everything that's been going on. And I think that really saps in my creativity, which I think is probably why I was having so much trouble sort of finding my footing with this next book. I was sort of fortunate that when the pandemic first hit, I was working on revisions for Local Women Missing. And that seems to be a less creative part of the process. Yes, I'm still being creative and revising and things like that, but it's not as difficult's not the right word, but I think I don't have to be as creative when I'm revising as when I'm drafting. So I was able to kind of get through the spring on that. But once the summer rolled around and I knew I needed to be starting a new book, that was a little bit harder. But like I said, I think I'm about a fifth of the way into the next manuscript, and I'm starting to feel really comfortable with it. And so this is the part that I really start to like, and I feel grounded.
Thank you. Okay, now the questions are coming in. These are great questions. So when you have the ending planned or decided, do you also have most of the main characters' growth developed? Their growth developed?
Yeah, I actually don't. I really don't know much about my characters until like literally it happens on the page. And I know, I've said it before, and I've heard other authors say it about, how these characters are really driving us versus the other way around. And in some ways it's true. I'll be working on a scene, and of course it's all coming from me, but I feel like, all of a sudden I'll think of some line of dialogue or some backstory that one of these characters has that 5 minutes before that I had no idea they had. And it makes me see that character in a totally different light, and just sort of influences the way that things are going to go from this point forward. So my characters evolve all the time, throughout the book. And sometimes they'll do something on page like 250 that shocks me, and I have to go back and kind of rework, those first pages to make sure it all goes together.
Thank you. Our next question, do you write in longhand or typewriter computer?
Always a computer. I have horrible handwriting for one, but I think too, just the ease of being able to, like move this paragraph over here, and just all of that is so much easier on the computer. I just use a Word document. I know that there are Scrivener and other programs out there for authors, but I've always just used a Word document.
Here's a great question. Do your kids feel pressure to write well for school assignments with you as their mom?
I'm really lucky, I have to say, that they do really well in school without a whole lot of prompting from me. So I'm really fortunate there. But they've both. My daughter is 15 now, and she used to love to read. She's less of a reader now, but my son, I say he's always loved to read. He's always loved to write. He always wants to be writing some story. So, and I don't really feel like, I think it was just something that like he organically took to. It wasn't necessarily something that had anything to do with me being a writer. But yeah, I don't know. I will say that, most of their teachers do know that I'm a writer, and I've been able to, get into some of their classrooms and talk to their classmates about writing and things like that. So maybe they feel a little pressure.
That's awesome. Just a comment from one of our audience members that you look so sweet and innocent to come up with the plots of these psychological themes, and that I loved the other misses.
Thank you.
And do you have a favorite author or a book now? And who did you like as a child?
Oh, that's a great question. I think in the suspense genre, the book to me that just like sets the bar so high and is the one that I wish I had written is Before I Go to Sleep by S.J. Watson. The book is just, it's so smart. I want to say it probably came out in maybe 2014, 2015, something like that. It's just so smart and well done. And I don't know, the ending just totally got me. So I highly, highly recommend that for anybody who loves a suspense novel. Growing up, I was, Babysitter's Club, Nancy Drew, all those. But I think that the two books that always stand out to me the most are both by Natalie Babbitt, Tuck Everlasting and The Eyes of the Amaryllis. I read those when I was young. I remember, teachers reading them to us in class. I read them to my daughter when she was old enough. And I think, both of the books, they're a little on the supernatural side, but they have a lot of mystery in them too. And so I think that was maybe like some of the early mystery books that I was drawn to.
And how do you formulate your storyline ideas, and how do you deal with writer's block?
Yeah, that's a good question. The ideas, I just go with it. I have to say, like, I really don't plan too much out in advance. I don't have post-it notes everywhere. Usually if I get an idea that I'm afraid I'm going to forget, I'll just like scroll a little bit down in the manuscript and type it, or I'll open up a separate Word document just to keep those ideas so I don't forget them. Or those ones I come up with at like 2 a.m. My phone is always somewhere near my bed, so I'll jot them in the notes section. So something like that, but otherwise I just kind of organically let it flow and see what happens. As for the writer's block, and I get it a lot. I think because I don't outline in advance, I don't know, but I would have to guess it probably happens more often to me than maybe somebody who does outline because they've worked through some of those things already. But usually I call it a day for the writing. I put the computer away and, I go fold laundry or go running or whatever, because it seems like usually I'm always thinking, about my book, whether I'm actively writing or not. And it seems like some of those those tricky issues that I'm stuck on, I think I can work out a lot easier when I'm not staring at a blank page. So that's kind of my advice for writer's block, is just get away from the manuscript, give yourself a mental break from it. Chances are your wheels are still spinning, and you'll figure it out later on.
That's good advice to go for for a run or a walk to clear your head, definitely. Here's an interesting question. Do you ever draw from experiences from your teaching career and working with your students?
I don't draw any specific examples of things that, happened in the classroom or something that one of my students had been through. But I do think that teaching just, sort of opened my eye to many different personalities. And I think, this is it was true of my students, and it's true of my characters, is you don't really know what kind of internal struggles somebody is going through. You can only know so much about another person as they're willing to share with you. And this is one of the points that I feel like I'm always trying to get across in my writing. What you see is not, necessarily what's the reality of that situation. So that's kind of one of the things that I think I've kept from my teaching days.
Absolutely. A comment, someone that loves your books and just want to say thank you for doing this. Very
Oh,
enjoyable.
thank you.
And our next question, do you follow true crime for inspiration?
You know, I do some, but I not a ton, I have to say. It's more, that I'm reading suspense novels, that I'm watching things on TV. I do like unsolved mysteries on TV, that kind of thing. But I'm interested in the true crime for sure, but I don't know why I've never really made it more of a priority as to what I read or what I watch or listen to. The podcasts are great too.
Yeah, unsolved mysteries is awesome. Um, okay, that one we answered. And then what are your tips for anyone just starting out to write?
Yeah, I think that I have a few. I think for one, reading, and you'll hear that from a lot of people, but I think that just reading, you sort of just absorb different styles of writing. You can see how the way that different authors do it. I think just writing a little bit every day is always helpful. Just like anything else that you do, practice. You get better with practice. So just write a little bit, and just kind of figure out what's working for you, what's not working for you, and try and improve on that. If you're the kind of person that's comfortable sharing your work with others, I think that that's really valuable. As I said before, when I was first getting started, I did not do that, but now that I have an editor, I can see the way my books grow so much from the time I turn in a draft to her until she and I work through revisions and I have a finished book. So I mean, if you're open to getting feedback, that's really helpful. And with that, be open to getting feedback, because as a writer, we're very sensitive people, and sometimes getting that feedback can be hard. It can feel like an insult, but it's not. So I think that just being open to it. Just because somebody makes a suggestion doesn't mean you have to take it, but just hearing what other people are saying about your writing is really helpful. And then, just understand that first drafts are generally not good. And that's the case for everybody. So sort of, like allow yourself to write a sloppy first draft, knowing you can go back and clean it up with every single revision. Because I think that some people feel like it needs to be perfect as it comes out. And I'll tell you, my drafts are far from perfect, but sometimes you just have to get those words down, because otherwise you don't have anything to work with. I'm reading Bird by Bird. I think I'm one of like the few authors in the world that's never read it, I feel like, but it's Bird by Bird by Annie Lamont, and it is so inspirational. So I would highly recommend it.
And anyone out there who is an aspiring writer, we actually have a writers group through the library, and it's led by Karen, our very own Karen. It's on the third Thursday of each month at 7 o'clock. And it's on Zoom, obviously, so until we're back in person. I think we have time for one more question. Did you ever consider self-publishing?
I get asked that question a lot, especially because here I had this 2-year gap after I finished The Good Girl, and before I heard back from an agent. Knowing what I know now, I think it would have been more difficult, just the whole marketing and publicity and all of that I do get from my publisher. I don't know that I have the business sense to kind of have figured that out for myself. I know that there are a lot of platforms out there these days that do make, they offer a lot of guidance with the self-publishing. And so I do think that it's a wonderful thing for people to do. I just don't know that I would have had kind of the knowledge and the abilities to do it. So I truthfully didn't. I think the other thing that I needed, at least at that point in my career, was validation from somebody that my writing was good enough to be published. Because I think that was sort of the big mental block that I was having at that point, and had this agent not reached back out, or a publishing house made an offer on my book, I don't know that I would have felt confident enough putting my books out there for other people to read.
That makes sense. Well, I think this is a good time to stop. Mary, thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
This has been so much fun. Thank you for having me and for all the wonderful questions, Karen. And thank you to everybody who joined in tonight.
Yeah.
Yes, we would definitely need to have you in person at the library for a book signing once this is all over, because that was fabulous. Thank you so much. Thank you all of you out there for joining us tonight. This will be available on our YouTube page within a few days. So everyone stay safe and healthy out there and keep writing.
Yep.
and reading.
And reading.
And buy Mary's book and look for it on Netflix sometime.
Yay.
Thank you all. Have a
Mary.
great night, everyone.